My name is Ray. Welcome back to another episode of Ray's Economics Clue Book. Today we'll be talking about the money demand supply model, which basically ties into the liquidity preference model. So first, let's look at the money demand curve. The money demand curve is the relationship between our M1 demand and the interest rate. So basically, it's money versus held versus the opportunity cost of holding money, which is, of course, the investments you can make with the money or the savings you can make with the money. So it represents the opportunity cost. Why? Because at high interest rates, the opportunity cost of holding money is higher because you're missing out on much more interest payments. And so therefore, more people are likely to hold less money and to save more of that money. And so the money demand when the interest rate is high is low. However, when interest rate is low, the money demand is high because your opportunity cost of holding money, which is a lower interest payment, is now a lot lower. So more people are willing to hold more money, and so the demand for money increases. So basically, the money demand, of course, can shift. But like all curve shifts we talked about so far, it happens only because of external reasons, not because of interest rate changes. So if the aggregate price level were to change, then the money demand would change. For instance, an increase in aggregate price level would increase the money demand because we would need more money to purchase the same amount of goods because the price of those goods is increased. And so this will shift the money demand curve to the right as there is more quantity demanded per interest rate. If there's an increase in real GDP, there's an increase in more disposable income perhaps per household, and therefore households are willing to hold more money as well because they have more wealth, and therefore MD also shifts to the right. If technology increases, for instance, we have better ATM services that makes money more accessible, or Venmo services that makes payments more easier on a mobile level, then we will also see the money demand increase because we will see more accessible cash, or we will see a decrease because we will see people be more willing to hold the money, save the money at the same time. So mainly, of course, it works in the force of it decreasing as people are more willing to save money because they're more easy to withdraw that money at the same time. And of course, regulation can also affect our money demand curve, money demand shift. For instance, regulation Q regulation Q, when that was over, we saw where checking accounts used to not be able to pay interest rates for the checking account depositor, but after regulation Q, they were able to. And so checking accounts still are very near money, so they count as money demand in this situation. So as more people save in checking accounts because they are able to receive interest payments now legally, money demand increases because the demand for checking accounts, which is near money, increases. And finally, we combine this into a liquidity preference model of interest rate. Basically, it combines our money demand curve we just talked about with our money supply curve. Our money supply curve is vertical because it does not change the interest rate. The money supply curve is strongly influenced and basically, essentially set by the Fed. The Fed can strongly influence it and basically set it directly or indirectly through its different means, such as the discount rate, the reserve requirement, or its open market operations, etc. And so, through what the Fed sets money supply as, we have an equilibrium where the money supply crosses the money demand curve. We see an equilibrium interest rate at this point and we see an equilibrium money supply at this point. Now let's say the money supply was originally at point H right here, where with a lower money supply, a higher equilibrium interest rate. At this point, if the Fed were to set the money supply at point E, then point H will naturally slide to point E. Because at this point, the interest rate is so high, the demand for non-money assets such as bonds is very high, which drives the prices of these non-money assets up. As the prices drive up, the yield for these assets, such as the yield for bonds, decreases because their interest or coupon payments in proportion of their price decreases. Basically, interest rate decreases. And so as the interest rate decreases due to demand for non-money increasing, then we see point H slide to point E because interest rate decreases and then the money demand increases to point E where the Fed sets it. Now, the opposite scenario where we are at point L with a higher money demanded and lower interest rate, we will see an overabundance of bonds or non-money assets in the market, which will decrease their prices. So then, for instance, bond coupon payments would be higher in proportion to their overall decreased price, which would increase the interest rate back to RE, point E, where the Fed sets it, and the money supply also goes back to where the Fed sets it. So overall, in the long term, our final conclusion is that the liquidity preference model is all about money demand and supply. It is where equilibrium is reached, where the equilibrium interest rate, equilibrium money supply or money demanded is reached, D equals S. And basically, the LPM represents our individual households or the people in economies' opportunity cost of holding money. They can either invest that money and see a yield from that money, and there's also a risk, but there's also some risk in holding the money. However, in the case of perhaps checking accounts, the risk is very low to the point where it has a lesser impact on perhaps our opportunity cost of holding money. And of course, the Federal Reserve is the entity in the United States that dictates our money supply, our vertical line here in the LPM model. It dictates it mainly through open market operations and reserve requirement and Fed discount window that can either directly or indirectly affect and change and influence our money supply. So overall, the Federal Reserve interacts very strongly with consumers and our economy indirectly through helping set up our money supply, which of course helps reach an equilibrium money demand, money supply, and money equilibrium interest rate. So thank you, and see you next time.